I'm here with Arkansas State Senator Bryan King, Republican from Green Forest. And Senator King has sort of a unique perspective on America's political environment in the sense that he was formerly a member of the legislature. He spent some time in the legislature 10 years ago or so, took time out of the legislature, and has come back. And he has noticed things have changed. And sometimes when you're in the middle of something, you don't know how things have changed. You're caught up in the movement of how things have changed. And so you don't notice it. But he says things have changed. And I want to talk to him and get his perhaps unique insight on how the Arkansas, and in particular the Arkansas Republican caucus, and by extension, we can assume this is going on in many states, has changed over the past time. Senator, let's start. Fill us in about your background, when you came in the legislature, when you came out, back in, all that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll go back into politics, Mark, as far as actively being involved in campaigns starting in the early 90s. I mean, I was the county chairman and election commissioner 24 years ago. Seems like a long, long time ago. So, we've talked about it before when I thought of republicanism from, like my grandfather, and that was that it was about fiscal responsibility, budget responsibility, lowering taxes, more freedom, allowing people to make decisions, more local control. We believe that local control government, is best for the people, even when we may disagree with it. The state controlling more decisions, I've always been brought up that is like socialism, that the state controls more and doesn't allow cities or counties the flexibility to do things, even when I disagree with it. Getting things on the ballot, challenging what their government does, making changes to, people being able to easily get referendums to make changes, even when we disagree with it. We believe in a process that should be fair and straightforward and easy for citizens to do that. So there's been a lot of things that's changed.
No, wait a minute. Let's stop for a minute there. So what you're saying, I mean, it really sounds kind of like what Ronald Reagan was saying. I remember Ronald Reagan saying that every function of government should be done at the lowest level possible. I mean, he was against centralization too. Now, when it got into office, he was surrounded by people that didn't balance the budget. But honestly, I would take his budget deficits over today's. So I guess what I'm saying is you are not revisiting history or revising history here. But really, that is how, and I was a Republican county vice chairman back in the 90s for a brief time too. That's also what I remember. Now, I think the rank and file believes that's still what they're getting. Are you saying that's not what they're getting?
I don't think so. I mean, it's got where more decisions are made in Little Rock. I mean, we have bills come up in the legislature that, maybe I personally agree with those decisions, but yet I would tell people, if you really want to change it, run for the city council. And you can sit there and go down a path and pick and choose different things and think, well, and then eventually you're going down a path where you're deciding everything. And I think that's what's happening in the legislature. I mean, I tell people in the city government, whether it's, whatever decision it is, if you don't like it, run for your city council. And that's why, when we have the breathing and flexibility of government, you may have a city that may do something that is anti-business. And then when they suffer the consequences of that, they start changing. I know a city in Arkansas that, in the 90s and early 2000s, they were making decisions that hurt businesses, and eventually they changed back and started, once they felt the consequences of it, and then they had to meet their needs for their people, and they started raising taxes, they started saying, hey, we've got to change our behavior. So, and the other thing too is, I think,
can we stop on that? Because that is such an excellent point. That what you're saying in essence is government should be subject to free market forces. And if you do, if a city wants to be boneheaded, you let them. And if they make a mistake, they can fix it as quickly as they made the mistake, because local things can happen a lot faster, and it's a lot easier to change locally. It's a lot easier to escape stupid government locally. But when a whole state or a whole nation uses centralized control, makes one size fits all rules, it's not easy to get away from, and it's not easy to correct. So
yeah, and we hear this thing of like talking about socialism. Socialism or communism is about the state controlling things and making the decisions and not allowing situations, like I said, even though cities or counties may make bonehead decisions, and so when the more you start controlling decisions down Little Rock, even though I may agree with that decision, well, then you're taking your time that is spent on these few cities or counties that may be doing something you don't like, and trying to change it and influence the whole state or impact the whole state.
Can you give us a specific example?
Path.
You have an example for us of a law like that they passed that you thought was too authoritarian, too centralized?
Yeah, I think this last time they tried to pass a bill on regulating short-term rentals and banning short-term rentals in cities from doing it. You had a city like Eureka Springs, which is Democrat and liberal, that, and other cities like in my district, like I think another small town that's conservative, very conservative, and they just basically want to regulate how they do things. You have a city council, and so this bill would have banned short-term rentals. On one side, they say this is just a property rights issue, which it is. And if I was on a city council or quorum court, I would probably agree with that, to say, hey, let's let businesses and homes do these short-term rentals, even though this city may have either stopped short-term rentals or have just zoned them in certain areas. So I'm like, well, if you don't like that, then run for the city council. The more the state tries to control, and I'm not saying every decision, because there are some times that the state needs to come in and make a uniform decision for everybody. But we're doing it more so in Republican legislatures, and that's the socialism model. That's the picture, with everybody, making decisions from the state. And all of a sudden, we're supposed to be against that. And it's very hard to do that sometimes, to sit and vote against the state taking control when you actually maybe agree with the issues, but yet you just know that you have to have a policy and I just think that the state is taking too much control and trying to decide things in cities. Or you see a legislator that maybe he wants a special interest thing in his district, and so he makes a rule for the whole state, because it's easier to go down there and make a decision where 135 people and not know or understand the issues, rather than back home they get the issue beat and they don't like it.
So really, your overriding principle, local self-determination, is an overriding principle. And you may agree that something is right, but that doesn't mean that you should impose it on everybody. And sometimes they just have to make their own mistakes and learn. And or what if people are really different? I mean, Pea Ridge is right down the highway from Eureka Springs, completely different community. Maybe what's right for one is not right for the other.
Right.
I mean, isn't that freedom?
Yeah, there is some decisions, like on adult decisions or things like that comes up. And I think that that's a good point. And there's many times I've used Eureka Springs as an example. When they do their budgets as a city council, they're far more budget-wise than what the state does. The state wastes much more money in different things. In the city of Eureka Springs, while we may not agree with everything they may do, the mayor there and the city council stays on a tight budget to try and make everything work for their citizens. And I think that we've got where, like I said, too many decisions are being made down there that local people are supposed to be able to decide. As President Reagan said, the best government, I think, paraphrasing, is the government closest to the people.
Now that brings us to the second point. It ties right into it perfectly, because if Little Rock wants to make the rules for everybody, then they need a budget that corresponds with the scope of what they want to control. So How about the attitude towards government spending and what conservative means and how that's changed?
Yeah, when I first came in, it was overwhelmingly Democrat, supermajority Democrat, but yet they would ask the things in the budget, and they were Democrats, but a lot of them were just business people, retired people trying to manage state budgets, and so they would ask the question, any program you wanted to do, or anytime you wanted to increase spending in anything, no matter what it was, how are you going to pay for it? That was the main question that you just keep getting pounded into you. How are you going to pay for it? Many times today, Republicans, just when they do a program, they just say, whatever to get it passed. I mean, and they don't have a plan to pay for it, just like, we'll talk about the Learns bill in the next section, but, we're going to come in this new money. This new money is going to come in. I mean, you have situations of, the just increase in spending and not even thinking about that, taking federal money without, thinking. I can look back to the Medicaid expansion. Governor Beebe said that if we expanded Medicaid here in Arkansas, we were going to save money, and it was going to free up the budget money, and it was going to cost less than Medicaid. Asa Hutchinson came in and said the same thing, had a task force that basically said that. It was a complete lie. I mean, and I say lie because there's no way you cannot look at the figures and say we were going to spend less money on Medicaid, and we didn't. So they just say whatever, and then they get through it. But it probably gets to my last point of saying about how government is. I always say how you campaign is indicative of how you're going to govern, and it's a cycle. And so basically today, what it is you vote for all this increased spending and all these programs, and you dump, whether it's Medicaid or whatever it is, you dump $250 million, $500 million, or $1 billion over 3 years. Well, then somebody's getting that money, and you're voting for them to get that money. They then turn around and special interest fund your campaign. And campaigns today, sadly, is more about how you can get as much special interest money, and then from March to May, lie or mislead or deceive people in a campaign to get elected. And then once you do that, you start the cycle all over again. And you go down there in Little Rock and say, oh, I just cry socialism. Well, you just turn around and I said, you realize you're the state. And now you're the state and you're trying to control people. And I got a fly buzzing me. I guess it's like the government or something right here. But
maybe it was the same one that was buzzing me. Flew 100 miles. Go ahead.
Yeah. And so it's like the more they control down there. And it's just, socialism about this Politburo picture of all these people in the suits where only a few people make the decisions and try and manage everything from the top. And that is not the way our founding fathers. They meant for people to be able to make the decisions in city councils and city governments and be able to make those decisions on what they can do is better than waiting on the state to decide.
I would say that what fascism is a form of collectivism too. And whether it's socialism proper or fascism depends on what they want to use the accumulated central power for. So who knows? It could be fascism instead of socialism, but that's not good either. And
no.
But you're telling me that today's Republicans in Arkansas, by and large, are no different in spending than the Democrats were just before the Democrats were replaced by the Republicans?
In many times, when I first came in, and Governor Huckabee was there, and the Democrats, they went through budget shortfalls. So they were very budget wise. They would look and say, you can pay for it this year, but how can you pay for it in year 3 and year 5? They would look down the road. And as I said earlier, in campaigns now, that's not it. I mean, we're looking at the filing period starting in November. So you're looking at the next races. So they just want political sound bites. No, they're not budget. In many ways, the Democrats, when I first came in, were far better budgeters and constraining, looking at state government and how you spent money than what is going on today.
What the Democrats, when you came in, and that was what, in 2006? 2006. The Democrats that got thrown out later for the Republicans, in part because they were spendthrifts, were better at watching the people's money than today's Republicans. That's what you're saying.
It is, and I think it's a shift. If you look at Washington D.C., for example, I mean, the last $1.8 trillion spending bill was passed by Republicans and Democrats. I mean, really, in today's thing, they're bad. But you have to understand, the legislators. I'm probably the only legislator that was down there that understood budgeting before bailout. I mean, now you've had these legislators that have been down there the last 12, 14 years are just the benefits of bailout. I mean, and so they really don't know what a budget shortfall is or looking at it. And so I think that's very concerning. And they just spend money without even thinking about, how they're going to pay for it. And so, that's why our country is in the spending trouble it is. It's not just because of Democrats. It's because of the people in power and making the decisions don't do that.
All right. So we've got two differences that you've noticed. One, nobody wants local control or decentralized power anymore. And number two, which is related to that, they all want to spend other people's money or maybe the next generation's money, so much stealing from the next generation to get reelected and buy votes.
That's
Is
right.
that,
I mean,
is
they
that the
just want to
summary?
take money.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, that's it. And it's like I said, it seems like it's more so than ever that you used to, if you made a campaign and you said, I was going to do this, you got held accountable. Now it's just deceive and mislead. And they just sit there and say, well, this is conservative. They use that tag all the time. And yet they're spending money like crazy down there and exponentially spending money.
Well, yeah, it's exponentially spending money and centralizing power is not conservative. It's either socialism or fascism, depending on what they do with that. But Senator King, we're running short of time. Do you have any last words before we go here?
Yeah, I just think that when somebody puts something out, like I said, I want to be writing some columns and doing some things and showing things of how things have changed. And, we talked like last session about how we should make it easier for citizens to get things on the ballot. One of the things that was said during that was really crazy, that they said, oh, these cities are sneaking in and they're doing this stuff on tax raises and everything. And I agree with that. I mean, I agree with there's some situations. But I said, before, and this just comes back to the state controlled and how you don't question things. I said, the number one place I've seen that sneaky tax raises and corrupt things and that happen is right here. So I said, why don't we fix this first? And then, then worry about some little small town that pops up and has a special election to raise taxes. I mean, it just was.
Right. And like you said, if the people want to fix that, they can change their city council. They don't need Little Rock to fix. Yeah. To make a one size fits all rule. And the last question, Senator, you took some heat. It's a part of centralizing control, and everything has to come through them. They've made it much harder for citizen-led petitions to get circulated successfully. They've changed the law, and what our state constitution calls the first right of the people to have citizen-led petitions has changed the law. They've made that just about where you can't do it now. And you're against that. And tell us what happened when you came out against that and what you did and what their response was.
Yeah, I don't think they really locked it. And I mean, my thing was, I said, hey guys, I go back to republicanism back through one of my family lines all the way back to the 60s. And that was just something you were taught, making it easier for the citizens to make changes to their government or challenge what their government does is like one of the commandments, like in the Bible. And trying to make it harder is not what we should be doing. And I think, as I told some of them, I said, have you ever heard of the Boston Tea Party? I mean, where they got frustrated with all the decisions made in London, England, and they felt like they should have a say so. And so it was very very concerning that notion is like not even a part of republicanism anymore.
And you said this to a Republican group or someone that was asking you to explain yourself?
Other Republican legislators. And, many of them, and I don't mean to top this, it was like, I was a Republican chairman when many of you were, in diapers. And now all of a sudden, those principles that we had back then don't mean anything today. They're and it gets back to any political party in power wants to insulate themselves. I mean, that's just that is a nature that happens, and I just don't believe that. I think that we should be able to make it where citizens, even things that I disagree with, I agree on a fair, straightforward, easy process that citizens are allowed to challenge things, and to violate that it's like violating one of the 10 Commandments. I mean, we give an oath before we get sworn into office to uphold the Constitution. And I feel like the Constitution says that, you know, it should be 15 counties and not upping it to 50. And so, but we'll see if the courts look through it through political lenses when they make.
All right, because you are joining a lawsuit to get that overturned on the grounds that it violates the Arkansas Constitution. That law.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Yep. They all believe in the free market, except that as it applies to them. But thank you so much for coming on, Senator King. Appreciate you being here.
Thanks.